And Rick, if you would, tell them a little bit about what we signed on to.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm reminded as we go through and talk tonight about a movie that I love, and many of you probably have seen, and in the dark days of this session I've referred to it often, but The American President. In The American President, President Michael Douglas says, you've got to, you remember that we're all but temporary occupants of the job. And if we keep that in mind, and we remember why we're in office, we get to where this bill makes a lot of sense. But Representative Rapps told you what the process that's currently in place has resulted in, and it should come as no surprise because that's exactly what the process anticipates, that the party in power gets to control the new map. And Democrats did it when we were in power in previous years. I don't think quite the way it's been done this year. But all parties are equally guilty in the sense of having created a system that intends and is designed to perpetuate itself in power. But there is another way, and we decided that it might be helpful to really look at what other states were doing and what outcomes were in other states, and begin to look at a system of reform. And the best source for us, not only on this issue, but on all campaign finance reform and lobbying reform, has been the coalition that is represented by Jane and Tom and Common Cause. And they really did a lot of the groundwork, the research, and the prep, and got a number of us thinking about one model that may be the superior way to think about it in changing this. There are a couple of different options out there. One is what Arizona's done, which is to create a redistricting commission that is to develop the plan, but the appointees of the commission are all still political. And if any of you saw in the paper a few weeks ago, the Arizona governor, who's Republican there, House and Senate's Republican, didn't like the plan that their independent redistricting commission came up with, and so they impeached the redistricting chair and removed her. The Arizona Supreme Court stepped in and ordered her back in place and said that it was an unconstitutional act. But their redistricting commission clearly hasn't eliminated the politics going on in Arizona, partly because there's no faithfulness to the process that they've set up by their House and Senate. So the redistricting commission, that you have commissioners appointed by the governor or the Senate and the House, didn't seem to us to be a model that was going to get us out from under the ultimate problem we're facing here. So we looked at a second model which has worked for 40 years now in Iowa. And recognizing that there are differences in Iowa and North Carolina, we'll talk about those. The model is a simple one, and that is that they give an order to their very split state, much like ours, very split state in terms of Democrats controlling one generation, Republicans controlling another. And what they do is they give all of their data from each census to 3 or 4 members of their legislative, I think it's 3 members of their legislative staff, a lawyer, a demographer, and geographer. And they are secluded, and they are told come up with the districts based on essentially a couple of criteria only: population, contiguity of the districts, and compactness of the districts, and any adherence that has to be had to any other federal law that's required, although they don't have a Voting Rights Act issue that we do. And you may not look at political affiliation. You may not look at incumbency or incumbency protection. And that is not to be part of your change. That plan is then submitted to the public for public comment and through comment also on a Citizens Advisory Commission. An example this year that Jane has talked about in previous sessions is just an issue of a community where they were trying to keep a precinct whole, but the community said, look, there's actually, our precinct sort of is a double area. There's really a bigger community of interest, and we really want to keep our community of interest together that has some historical basis. So the precinct wasn't the critical category there. The community of interest was, put the community of interest together in the district. And so they made those kinds of changes in response to public comment, unlike what happened in Haywood County. And then this plan is submitted to the legislature of Iowa. They have a short time to develop the plan, I think 45 days, and then the legislature has 7 or 10 days to act. And they may only vote the plan up or down. They may not amend it. They may not, put cousin Susie in this district and, John in that district. They either vote up or down. And they get, if they vote it down, they need to state on the record their reasons to defeat it. It goes back to staff. Staff has, I think, 7 to 10 days again to create a new plan. Comes back to the legislature, up or down, and that can happen only 3 times. The legislature doesn't have the capacity to amend. It only has the capacity to vote it up or down. And then there's a process that occurs if there isn't agreement. Well, in 40 years, they've agreed every time. This is a split state. They have agreed 4 consecutive census. They have had no litigation. They have had incumbents running against each other because that's the way the data shakes out. They've had Democrats opposing Democrats and Republicans opposing Republicans. And it doesn't matter because they have willed their state to a better long-term common interest, which is to have this process that avoids everything we're going through. It has decreased polarization of the parties in Iowa. It has tended to create more competitive districts. It has allowed people of more diverse backgrounds to run. It has taken some of the money out of politics in Iowa, at least at the state level. And the end result is they've had agreement. And interestingly enough, in each of the 10-year cycles, if the Democrats were the ones that were in power in 1980, as a result of their plan, the Republicans won for the next generation, the next decade. And it's happened each of the 4 years. The party in power actually drew maps, agreed, and voted on maps that took them out of power the next 10 years. And they have adhered to it because that's part of the will of the people of Iowa. We think, assuming that we can do the same thing here, recognizing we've got some Voting Rights Act issues that Iowa doesn't face, and that the staff would have to deal with that the same basic system ought to be in place, and that is the essence of the bill that we created in bipartisan fashion. We made sure we had 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats on the bill. The co-sponsors are multiple Democrats and multiple Republicans. It passed the House overwhelmingly. Don't remember, it wasn't
88 to 27.
And near the end of session, the Senate has to date refused to undertake a discussion of the bill, although they have the option to do that at the short session coming up, or any of the in-between long sessions we seem to be having if they chose to do it. So that's the model that we put out there based on the Iowa experience. And it was interesting, and I'll hush at this point so we can turn it back to Jane. But as we were having our debate on this in committee, literally, as this bill was going through committee and having all this discussion, within 1 week this year, Iowa put their plan out, passed it on their first vote, and we had online to our legislators the Iowa Republican chair of their redistricting committee, the ranking minority Democratic vice chair, trying to persuade our folks, and I think we're persuasive, in committee, saying this process works for us, and there's no reason it can't work to any population that's committed to the long-term community interest of their state, as opposed to the short-term interest of the political party they happen to represent. And my sense is if it can be done in Iowa, it can be done in North Carolina.
Super.